All right, well, we're just past the 9 o'clock mark, so I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. Just a few housekeeping items. My name is Elise Kuntz. I am the Director of Marketing for ACP Creative IT and Camera Corner Connecting Point. We do appreciate everybody's time this morning going through our Mitel solutions and hearing from some experts from Mitel this morning. Just a few things before we get started. We are recording this webinar, so we will send that link out to you by the end of the week. So if you did want to share that with your teams or anybody else that you think would benefit from this information, we'll send that to you by the end of the week. Your microphones are all automatically muted, so if you do have any questions or commentary or anything like that, please feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll be sure to answer any questions that you have throughout our time together here. We'll leave a few minutes at the end to specifically address any questions, but if it's something applicable during that time, we can absolutely let Lou know here. With that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Lou Gallagher, the Consumer Engagement Specialist from Mitel.
Yeah, thank you, Elise. Good morning, everyone. As Elise said, I'm Lou Gallagher, and I'm going to be walking through the consumer engagement strategy for everyone this morning. Just a little background about myself. I've been doing this about 35 years now. Started off as a software developer and CTI developer for a company called Norstan up here in the upper Midwest. You might have heard of them. Did that for 10 years. Went to a company called Cisco Systems and helped develop their IP telephony capabilities and call center capabilities as a design engineer. I had my own consulting firm for a while, and after that, one of my customers hired me on. And for 18 years, I was a senior director and vice president of engineering and architecture, managing infrastructure teams, DevOps teams, obviously call center teams, PMOs, things like that for the last 18 years. And for the last 2 years, I've been a consumer engagement specialist for Mitel, helping organizations such as yourself kind of not only understand the technology, but the strategy and the why behind what we're going to talk about today. So with that, we'll get started. I'm going to just turn off my camera and let you see the important stuff here. So we'll get going. Everybody should be seeing my screen right now. Elise, can you see the screen?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. So what we're going to talk about today is really consumer experience, right? Everyone wants to start, and especially like now that I've been at Mitel, I'm going to use a pointer here as well because I like to show specific things on my screen. Because everyone thinks of Mitel as a phone company. It really isn't that. And the same with Camera Corner is one of our VARs. It's much beyond that now. Is if you look at our tagline, it's about powering connections. It's not about a voice solution anymore. If it was just a voice solution, you really shouldn't be having a conversation with us. It's beyond that, and it's about consumer engagement. And what we're going to talk about is the trends that are happening in the market, the why is it happening, and then how do we create a world-class consumer engagement strategy. It's not just about the technology. We're going to talk about the technology a lot, but at the end, we're going to kind of wrap it up and say, you know, how and why and where do you do this? Again, I was on the business side, and I was brought into a rather large organization here in the Twin Cities. We were about 12,000 employees to help with our consumer engagement experience. And we did a lot of work, and what you're going to see in this presentation are pieces of that. Because every company has customers. I mean, the definition of a company is somebody who serves customers. And we all have different varying types of customers. If you're in the finance industry, it's one type of customer. If you're in the healthcare, which I was in, you have a patient experience. If you're in retail, that's a whole nother. But everybody has customers. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. So our number one question is, why create a consumer engagement strategy? So again, it's not just about the technology. It's about the strategy that we would create. Everybody wants to jump in. When I came to my organization, they said, well, we've got 10 products doing this. And I said, okay, that's great that we've got 10 tools to solve what? And that was my question. What were we trying to solve? And I went all the way to our CEO and said, what patient problems are we trying to solve? And the answer was either no strategy, or we had fragmented strategies. Every business unit had their own strategy. So the first thing we did is we said, we've got to create an enterprise-wide strategy. We have to become holistic. And then once we do that, we have to say what tools are going to fit that strategy. And again, we're going to talk a lot about the tools and the technology, but it's as important to understand is why do we even create the strategy in the first place? And again, many organizations, when I go and sit with organizations such as yourselves, the first question I ask is, do you have a formal consumer experience strategy? And I literally will tell you less than 2% do. And I'm talking big organizations, small organizations. So one thing you can take, hopefully I've given you some information 5 minutes into our presentation, is create a consumer engagement strategy. And if you need help, you've got a great partner in Camera Corner as well as Mitel. With that, just to show what's happened, is you look at digital transformation. We're going to talk a little bit about digital transformation because it is a buzzword out there. I don't like buzzwords. Coming from a technical background and now being more on the business side, I think buzzwords are just people trying to look smarter and try to create confusion within the organization. But people use it. I think it's important to understand it, but really put some meaning behind it. So, you know, people didn't have a strategy, and then COVID hits. And COVID has really changed how we think about things. And to relate this to you, in my last position, I was in charge of our business continuance disaster recovery planning, our BCDR planning. We had contingency plans for technology failures. We had contingency plans for pieces of the business not being able to operate from the location that we were operating in. There was no way I would have ever created a strategy where my entire organization had to work in a remote fashion. It might not be remote, but it would be in a remote fashion where we have this disconnect, and you see video conferencing and all of these types of technologies really coming into play now. Well, we should have planned for that, and we really didn't. And that's part of a consumer engagement strategy. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So just again, we're prepping for the larger part of the conversation here is just the why. Why are we creating a consumer engagement strategy? It really is about that digital transformation, and we'll define that as we go through. And I'm not going to read these statistics or slides, but you can see 78% of the millennials are tweeting. That's a big deal. We've got to capture that. Remember, Camera Corner Mitel is not just about phones anymore. It's about that entire consumer engagement, and social media is a big piece of that. The middle piece here is what you really look at, the loyalty of your customers. We like customers that like us and want to become frequent customers, where they generate more of the revenue, they buy more frequently, and their spend is actually more often than not larger than a non-loyal customer, somebody that just kind of flew by, bought a product, and went. And we'll talk about how we can create a strategy based on technology that helps us all move to enhancing our consumer experience. You look at the changing behavior. I just did a road show, a big one for about 250 people, a webinar, and it was all around mobility and how that impacted business, how it impacts the financial industry, for example. Mobility is a big piece of this. And what we're seeing out there, as people do not have a consumer engagement strategy defined, they have a mobile functionality and channel that's separate than the rest of their channels and engagement with their consumers. And that's a separation in how we do our consumer experience. And that's a bad thing for any of our customers, and any of us as customers. We've got to have this holistic strategy, and mobile becomes a part of it. Social media, I mentioned earlier, that becomes a part of it. Too many times my organization was the same, is my social media strategy was run by my marketing team, and they were off buying products that created a solution that solved a point problem. The problem being is it didn't solve the holistic consumer engagement problem because I needed both of these things to work in concert with each other. And we just didn't have it. And that's how things are changing. If you look at the millennials, and the millennials are starting, you know, my daughter is 30 years old. I would put her in the top end of the millennials. Is they're starting to change. They're becoming the larger bulk of the buying community and consumer interaction. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these statistics. You'll have this presentation when we're done. But it's pretty powerful that we've got to have a strategy that isn't just about voice. And a lot of you have probably turned on SMS texting or chat. It's even beyond that. So the speed of change for your organization is lightning fast, more so than ever before. And we've got to keep up with that speed of change. So that's why we have a consumer engagement strategy. Now, how do we attack this? How do we bring in a technology conversation? We can't make it too technically geeky for the business because we're just going to shut the business down. What the business is going to do is they're going to continue to buy point solutions. So we've got 3 phases or 3 ideas that we're going to bring to you today. The first is defining digital transformation, because I think it's worth defining. And then we'll talk about omnichannel versus multi-channel. And I think this is where the rubber really starts to meet the road. Is I would ask you if you can respond back and we could have a dialogue. Does your organization, A, have a consumer engagement strategy, a formal one? And I'm going to challenge that you don't. Then my second question is going to be, do you have a multi-channel or omni-channel strategy, which is a subset of the consumer engagement strategy? And I would doubt that you do, because a lot of people get confused with the word multi-channel and omni-channel, especially from people like Mitel that come out and say, well, I'm omni-channel. And you say, okay, what's the difference between the two? We'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about a technology ecosystem. And we're not going to talk about it as bits and bytes, but we're going to talk about it and how it impacts the business. And again, your consumer engagement strategy. This is all about how do we help you build this consumer engagement strategy, and then how do we put the pieces of technology together. So with that, this is a definition. I could not find one when I looked up digital transformation a few years ago for my organization. Again, I was hired in to create this new strategy for my organization, and we didn't have it, so I kind of piece parted this together. I think the key pieces are for your organization. So forget the buzzword of digital transformation. And if I asked you as a consultant, I said, do you want your organization to be profound and accelerated in how you do business with your customers? You're obviously going to say yes. Do you want it to be strategic and prioritized? You're obviously going to say yes. And if I ask you, do you want it to be with present and future shifts in how you're going to run your business, you're going to obviously say yes. They're lawyer questions, I call them. I know the answer before I ask the question to lead you into the next conversation. And the next conversation is, how are you doing this? Are you aware that you're doing this? Are you doing this in pieces and parts rather than as a whole? And we've got to think about digital transformation in these 3 ways. Are we making profound and accelerated decisions? Are we strategic and prioritized? Again, I led the PMO for my organization, and we would have about 150 to 200 projects going at any one point in time. That's like herding, not cats, it's like herding a field of cats. And you just can't get, because every business leader thinks their project is more important than the next. And we've got to really look at it and have that strategic and prioritized vision in mind. In the present and future, this used to not be as important, but today it's phenomenally important. I use this example why I have this picture of a bridge covering land. You'd probably wonder why, but it's a phenomenal story. It's the Chattanooga Bridge in Honduras. And in Honduras, they get a lot of hurricanes through, and the hurricanes would wipe out the bridges. And this was the main bridge going to the city. And they had problems with it getting wiped out. So what they did is they commissioned a Japanese organization to build a 100-year hurricane bridge, they called it. And the Japanese company came in and said, yep, we're going to make a bridge that does that. It was in 1998. As unbelievable fate would have it, that same year, Hurricane Mitch, one of the most powerful hurricanes that hit Honduras, hit the island, and it wiped out every bridge except for this bridge. And I don't know if you can see the problem with this bridge, but the river used to be here, and it got shifted 1.5 miles to the east. So the bridge literally wasn't covering the water anymore. That's what we struggle with as organizations as it comes to a consumer engagement strategy. We think, oh, we've got this covered today. There's nothing more we need to do for 5 years. That couldn't be further from the truth. As you go down, as you get into this consumer engagement strategy, it has to be, I'm a lean process person, it has to be a plan, do, check, act. You don't ever take your eye off this ball. It's a continuous process improvement. and it becomes part of the organization. And that's why we have to have these future shifts in mind, because I'm telling you, if we don't, our competition is, and they're going to fly by us. So hopefully we set it up now for the technology portion of the conversation. And how do we relate the technology back to our business counterparts? So there's a move from multi-channel to omni-channel. I discussed earlier that if I asked you the question, do you have a formal channel strategy? I'm betting no. And if you do, I'll bet you it's off a little bit. And why I would say it's off is when I sit with organizations and I consult with them, I'll say, okay, do you have a multi-channel strategy? And they'd say no. And I say, do you do multi-channel? And they might say no, or they might say yes. But we send out mailings to consumers, our customers. We send out emails to our customers. We're proactively reaching out to our customers. They're calling us or texting us or coming into us. These are all channels, and they're all ways of channels. We'll talk about this later. Whether we recognize it or not, we have this strategy in place today, because no one company is going to be everything for you. And it inhibits us from getting to this strategy, which is omni-channel. Same with social media. It's becoming a very part of it's a real strategy that customers have to go after. And many of my customers that I meet with, God, social media, it's not that big of a deal. But you saw the stats earlier. It is a very big deal, and we have to bring that into our omni-channel strategy. And again, I said that we have to do plan, do, check, act. This is not an all or nothing. If you're a technologist and you put in a phone system before where you have a big bang and a cutover, and you know the world's problems are solved when you put in this new technology, that's not the way consumer engagement works. Everything we're talking about today can be done in phases. Many of my customers that I'm working with are on their second, third, fourth phases of their consumer engagement strategy, not installing their call center software. You won't ever hear me say call center or contact center. It's not about that anymore, and the sooner we get off that conversation, the better. It's funny because a lot of companies are now talking about screen pops like it's this new great thing of 2020. And everyone's going, I want integration to my back-end environment. And we really don't know what we're asking for there, because I gave you a little bit of my background, and why I did that is A, to show you how old I am, but B, to show you that I did screen pops back in the late 80s, early 90s. Do you really want to have a conversation with me about something that I was doing 20, 30 years ago? Or do you want to get into a new world conversation about how do workflows impact us? It's well beyond screen pops. So again, when I went to my organization, the last organization I went to, and they said, we need to do screen pops. We need to do screen pops. And I asked the question. I said, so we do a screen pop. We have the phone system, a call, a text, an email, go into a database and grab that data and pop it out to a screen. What customer problem did I solve by doing that? I did solve one, but is it really this mic drop moment where I say, oh, I've got their information and now the agent can do everything they want to do? Absolutely not, because the consumer calling in could be a customer, could be a business partner, it could be an employee, or texting in or emailing in, wants something to happen from that interaction. That's where workflows come in, and 9 times out of 10, it's not just one something, it's many somethings that we have to address. And that's why we talk about workflows. We'll talk a little bit about moving to analytics rather than reporting. And then this bottom piece is all about that ecosystem that I talked about. There's a new openness between applications, and it's amazing how many of my customers get confused or sold on a strategy that is just about, oh, 2 companies have created a screen pop and that's the end of it, and all integrations are the same. They're not. It gets confusing, and we've got to have a good strategy around that. And that's these bottom 5. So this is what we're going to talk about. So communication methods are changing rapidly, and I'm not going to go into this in detail, but if you do not have a strategy around voice, really, again, I've been doing this 35 years. I've heard chats are coming in. I built a lot of chats back in the early 90s, mid 90s to early 2000s with the company I was with. I designed that, it never took off. And I would tell customers it's not going to take off. Well, about 3-4 years ago, with openness of this ecosystem where all these technologies can now communicate together effectively on your behalf, all of these technologies are in play. If you do not have a strategy that at least says in a year I'm going to be doing texting, or a year I'm going to do email, and I think it should be sooner than that, or in 2 years I'm going to be doing social media, you're already behind the game. And again, Camera Corner, Mitel, we can help you with this strategy. If you look at a typical customer journey, and all I have to do is ask yourselves, this is the easiest conversation to bring this point of consumer engagement together. If you go buy anything today, not to mention a car or a house or something like that, Zillow, you look at all these online services that you have. We as consumers, this is not a question of technology or anything. We as consumers, whatever we're consuming, have this up and down across these channels, right? This is really where the heart of it lies. And if we don't have a consistent strategy on how we manage these channels so they all interact together, that's the crux of our conversation today. We need to take this bouncing and normalize it so we can A, provide a better customer service experience, and B, save ourselves and our customers dollars spent on non-profitable things and have them focus on the services and products that are valuable to us and them. So that's digital transformation. So this multi-channel, omni-channel, I'm gonna get a little bit technical, but I promise you I'm gonna keep it at a business level as well. Here is the traditional channel strategy, is I have voice, I have emails, I have SMS, I have chats, I have all these things that are separate. When we talk about a true omni-channel, we literally talk about how do we bring all of these things together to work together. And you have to have a single engine like Mitel offers, or a single strategy of making the engines work together. Because what happens is there's a lot of companies out there today that say that they're an omni-channel company, and they're not an omni-channel company. And I'm not saying a product, I'm just saying be aware of your strategy and recognize the true value of omni-channel. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this has got to be the mindset of the organization. What happens too often, and you'll see this later on again in the presentation, is we buy, let's say, a Salesforce product. And Salesforce offers a product called Omnichannel. They literally have a product called Omnichannel. But last I looked, Omni means all, and Omnichannel means all. And what happens is people say, well, I've got the text, the email, but I don't have the voice. But you can tie that in and do this. No, that's not Omnichannel. That's kind of Omnichannel. It's 3/4 of Omnichannel, but it's not 100% Omnichannel. And again, I'm not saying Salesforce is bad. In fact, Salesforce is a phenomenal company, and we work with them a lot on creating this strategy. We have a full integration with them, like many other organizations of Mitel's product capabilities. But we're just educating here on how we bring that all together. So what is multi-channel? And this is actually a slide I did for my business units when I was a customer. We have all different types of customers with all different types of needs. They are reaching us, whether we say this or not as an organization, through our voice channel, which is my traditional. You have Outlook. I ask most organizations today, and it's starting to change. Been doing this about 1.5 years on this strategy, and we've got a lot of customers, but a lot of people use Outlook. Outlook is not a consumer engagement technology. And it's, again, nothing against Microsoft or the people that support Microsoft. It's a very good technology to do emails internally. It doesn't route, it doesn't let people aware of what's happening in the email, it doesn't analyze it, it doesn't do all these things. We might have a texting strategy, we might have a mobile strategy, we might have chat through something like Salesforce. All of these are separated individual conversations, and that's the bad of what we're doing today. We're creating multi-channel, which is good. We're offering our customers lots of ways of doing business with us, but they're all driven by separate engines. That's not only bad from this layer. Where it really impacts us is when we start to talk about this ecosystem I talked about earlier. And how do we bring all of these user interfaces and all of these applications that we have to do together under one umbrella? If you look at an omni-channel environment, something like Camera Corner and Mitel have, is you have your customers, they have all these different needs, but instead of having all these different engines, you let one engine manage everything. Your emails, your texting, your chat, your social media, mobile integration. If you're a credit union or a bank, We've got applications that we're building out now where your members will have a mobile functionality, and when they say text us, it uses the text engine of Mitel, brings it into our consumer engagement strategy, but utilizes the functionality of the mobile application. That's the ecosystem we're going to talk about in a little bit. That's just one example of where omnichannel is good. What we do then is we have one routing engine, and then we have all these back-end capabilities. And any customer, any organization has back-end databases, user interfaces, and applications that you access. You might have one. I doubt if you only have one. Everyone says they have one, but you go in and you sit and you see 15. My organization had 256 applications that were running at any one point in time. In my consumer engagement world, they had about 15 applications that they used at any one point in time. And then I have all these interfaces. If you go and you sit with the traditional contact center agent, my gosh, their jobs are becoming almost impossible because they have all these different places to go and look. And that's what breaks our process flow, our workflow that we talked about earlier. We can create custom workflows or even custom UIs if you'd like. So that's the value of omnichannel. And what a lot of people want to do is say, well, I'm going to get my channels from the people that do this. I'll show you, and I'd recommend not doing that. You want to get your omnichannel strategy solidified and have it integrate with the ecosystem. So anything and everything that comes and goes from your organization from a channel perspective is controlled by your omnichannel. You don't have 5 different channels to do things. And again, another example is I came from a large healthcare organization, as I said earlier, and we had 6 different paging and texting technologies in our organization. Well, my physicians had reasons for that. So if I went back to my texting and my mobile app of paging, and I went back to any one vendor that supplied that, they'd say, well, I want to do it for everyone. And my business unit would say, no, we got to have 2 or 3 mobile strategies. So what we did is we took those technologies and integrated them in with this technology. So to my consumers, it looked like one user interface, and then to my back end employees, it was 6 different interfaces. I'm hoping that makes sense because that's a critical part of the consumer engagement strategy. This is where I see people making by far and away the #1 mistake is we get hyped up on it. I hope you know I'm not trying to sell a product specifically. I'm trying to educate on the difference between a services technology of omnichannel and multi-channel. In most companies, because you don't have a consumer engagement strategy that's formal, get to this step, which is key. And now you have 5 or 6 different things doing your channel and communications, and it really does put a roadblock between us and really high-end consumer experience. So just to summarize, most companies currently have this deployed. You're in multi-channel today. The channels aren't managed as a single engine, and that's critical. It impacts and limits our ability to now go to this next level of this conversation for consumer engagement, which is the ecosystem strategy. It allows for different types of access within your organization. This is a good thing. What omnichannel does is it works as one across all. Not all products manage omnichannel the same. Consumer interaction agents only need one environment, and it's not managed well by the CRM. Okay. And Elise, I just got a text popping up. I want to make sure we're tracking and we're on.
Yep, we're still good.
Okay, thank you. So we've talked about digital transformation. I always want to go back and say, what have we talked about today? We talked about the need for a consumer engagement strategy. We talked about what digital transformation is and how we put that into that consumer engagement strategy. Then we talked about omnichannel versus multi-channel. And now we're talking about how do we bring those channels into the bigger conversation? And this is what every organization should be going after. We should not be buying products as an organization. We should be building an ecosystem of products. And we, the customer, control who does what and when for the value of our company, not the value of their company. You are not in this. Your company does not exist to make Camera Corner or Mitel money. You're in it to make yourselves better, yourselves money, and we realize that, and we realize we need to become part of this ecosystem, and if lucky enough, help build the strategy around the ecosystem, but we are not the ecosystem. So there's 3 levels of this, and I'm going to go through these really quickly. You have Mitel, and what people look at in Mitel is a phase 1. You put in the Mitel consumer engagement software, what people would commonly refer to as the call center software. But that's just the base. If that were the end of your conversation, I didn't do my job well, because if you're staying here, I promise you, your competition is going up here. It's just happening all over. It's happening quickly. Remember, the parts of our digital transformation is profound and accelerated. This is not profound and accelerated over here. This is. You're going to see a phase 2 that we're going to mention very quickly is Mitel has built our ecosystem out within the consumer engagement to provide you products and services that take your consumer engagement to the next level. And then we talk about how we integrate with this larger end ecosystem. This is what Mitel has to offer as a base. It's a lot. We have the Omnichannel. We have the social media. We have the open media. We have the screen and call recording. We have all these things inherent in the system. And you'll see that, by the way, with competitors of Mitel's. And what we shouldn't want anymore is this one product mentality. In the ecosystem, it's many products, not thousands, but a core 5 to 7 products that will build this strategy for us. And they will have all types of impact of value add to your business. These are just a few that Mitel brings. If you need outbound proactive reach, it's amazing when I meet with customers how many customers do not have a proactive outbound reach. Not to get into it too deep, but the organization I went to last, we did not have this. We installed it, and we increased our revenue in one division alone by over $1.5 million a year. We have workforce management. We have speech recognition. You have the co-browsing chat. If you've heard of AI, we have got a phenomenal relationship with Google AI. When you come in and do chats, it's a very in-depth conversation, but we can get into it. If you have the right fit for it, if you have a larger call center, you're getting 10x return on your money with Google AI and how we can integrate that into the Mitel ecosystem. You have screen and call recording, and then you have the social media piece as well. But this is the big piece. And I've given you a couple of nuggets to date. I think I've given you 2, is build that strategy around your consumer engagement, understand the value of omnichannel, and this is the last. So this is 3 takeaways from this conversation today. This is an architecture, or we call it a marketecture diagram, because it really is for the business. And what we did in my organization is we said, we are going to separate out our channel strategy from our application and database strategy, but I'm also going to integrate these 2 strategies. And this is the big piece. People are starting to now realize that application development is a good thing in the organization, and they're still wanting to buy products. I would recommend that you take a hard look at saying what you should buy and what you should build, because your value add as a customer is in the creativity you have as an organization, and that's something custom to you. And custom doesn't mean complex, and it doesn't mean high cost anymore. Where again, when I was a developer, when you wanted to do a screen pop, just to get that data to a screen was extremely expensive, extremely stagnant. You just didn't change it much because the cost was so high. That's because the work effort to do it was so great. In today's world, do not be afraid of customization. That's the last piece of advice I can give you. Get the strategy around your consumer engagement of saying, I have channels and I have applications and databases, and these 2 need to integrate together. What that will allow us to do together is create workflows that are value add to your customers, to your organization. We literally will evaluate workflows and say, what is the cost of building the workflow and what's the value of this? Strategic and prioritized. Remember, we had that conversation earlier in digital transformation. Strategic and prioritized to say, this workflow has X value and Y cost. And workflow number 2 has one, value, and two, cost. Which do we do first? Which is the higher hit? But please really look at this in depth. It's not just about installing a Mitel and integrating it to Salesforce. It's now, what do we do with those two products now that they work together? And this is the picture of creating that enterprise ecosystem. This is another form and view of that. It's what we've been talking about. And again, you're going to have these slides. It's a slide I used a lot within my organization to educate my organization on how we were going to do these things. So we had our consumers. Again, this is no different than the slides we just looked at. It's just a different view. We had all of our omni-channels. We had a digital transformation layer, and I'm not going to get into that. That's another conversation where we take APIs or application programming interfaces, which have been around forever, by the way. It's just now that they've become useful and functional. They've come to the masses. It's kind of like when the automobile first came out, only the rich could afford it. Well, in the olden days, only the big companies could afford my services, right? And developing screen pops and big end IVRs. Well, now those have come to the masses, and it's very easy, very cost effective, and very high business impacting. And then we have our user interfaces and our back end databases. And you see I've got it broken out. This is like an architectural or mark. You start with end users. How do we digitally transform the channels? What user interfaces do we want to create? And what application databases are required? That literally will follow your consumer engagement strategy created by an omni-channel that we can now create workflows for. And that's the value add. The value add is not in buying the product of Mitel and installing our call center and saying we can do this. Absolutely, Mitel has value, but the value to you is being able to create those workflows that have value. That is where you want to focus your time, and that comes from a consumer engagement strategy. So this is the conversation of screen pops to workflows. I'm not going to get into this very much, but I see so many companies making this mistake of they're buying a capability of saying I do a screen pop. And that's really not that big of a deal. I think what you have to do is come down to this piece right here and say, workflows must answer what business problems are we trying to solve, and is it enough to resolve a customer need, and what is the cost? We have to today, in today's environment, be very lean and very slick with what we're doing. If we go down a thought process that takes us a percentage of dollars, depending on your size of organization, it could be millions or it could be thousands. That's irrelevant. It's what is the cost to your business versus the value you would bring in? We have to start answering those questions. And that's not a technology conversation. That's not a business conversation. That's an enterprise conversation. So how do we create and execute on this plan? We have to, one, create a business value. Number two, we have to have value versus cost. It has to be a phased approach, and with that, we have to do plan, do, check, act. So again, I'm going to go back to what we started with when we started this conversation. We started about, this is a consumer engagement strategy conversation. Do we have a consumer engagement strategy that we have written and everybody's aware of and following? Is digital transformation a part of that? Do we realize the subset of digital transformation to that strategy? Within that strategy, we have the omni-channel functionality, not multi-channel. How do we separate that out? Then we talk about creating the ecosystem. Now, how do we do that? So business value to an effective CX strategy. It's amazing of why you should map this strategy. And I find it amazing when I meet with customers how they just almost resist this. Like, well, that's all the work that really doesn't add value. We just want to put something in. And then when they put something in, they go, well, that didn't really solve my business problem. We have to map the customer journey. Again, I come from a lean bronze. These are all lean bronze methodologies where you understand where the problem is and you resolve the problem. You just don't put a tool at it. Why should we map the customer journey? The return on marketing investments, improvement in customer service costs. This is the big one, is you're not going to get a good rate of return Again, it's not about buying a product or not buying a product. Look at this, -2%. If I could sit with senior leadership in a business and show this one statistic, that shows us why we need to change the mentality of how we go after consumer engagement. We have to be very laser focused. -2%. Do we realize what that means? Is our improvement goes down with the more money we spend on companies that don't have this mapped out. And that's a true statement. I've seen it hundreds of times in my consulting. And just the improvement in your sales cycle, and everybody has a sales cycle, right? We all have a service or product that we provide. That is the reason why we want to map this. That's why we want to spend time on the planning and not the execution. You plan for, it's the old adage in cutting wood, right? You measure 3 times, you cut once. It's the same type of conversation. So if I could just give you one piece of advice when you're getting this customer service strategy or consumer engagement strategy together, is map that strategy and that journey. We do this. Camera Corner and Mitel does this. This is how we do this. You have agendas. You actually put out agendas that say, look, right here, we sit with 3 different agents to monitor workflows. What's the purpose? Let's just not have a meeting to have a meeting. We have to have an end result. We create these use cases. Here's a credit union workflow that we did for one of our organizations. We map this all out, and then we create a phased approach. We say phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. Phase 4 might not happen. I've got one account, like I said, they're in phase 3. They're a year and a half into their relationship with what we're doing. Every phase has had a high rate of return. Back to here, we've measured it, we've gone back. Yeah, was there more time and cost up front? Absolutely, but I'm getting a 21% rate of return as opposed to a 2.2% rate of return. This is how you do it. And I would challenge most organizations don't do this, even the larger ones. Some of them, absolutely, and if you do, great, but many don't. Here's more diagrams, timelines. How are we doing what we're doing? Where are the pitfalls? Where are the challenges? This here, if you look at the dates, this is something I did for my organization. This was February of 2019 to 2020. It was a year and a half timeline. Architectural diagrams with timelines. How do we relate? Okay, this is a phase, this is that same phase, this is another phase, this is another phase. What's the value and what are we doing? Value versus cost. Where do we spend the budget? This is huge. I'm a planning guy. You saw the statistics. If we keep doing, it's the old Einstein adage, insanity is continue to do what you do and expect different results. We've got to start realizing that this world is changing. We've got to come to it with open minds, no egos. Nobody's got this figured out right now. The companies that are following this process and methodology are doing much better than the ones that aren't. So we look at on planning, first and foremost. Number 2, building out technology to meet the business needs. Do not install technology if it's not solving a business problem. It's funny, people are really wound up about cloud versus not cloud right now, and I just laugh at that. I'm an engineer by trade. I've done this many, many times. First off, most of the companies that say they're a quote unquote cloud company are not. I look at what's the business problem that cloud solves for me or doesn't solve for me. And many times organizations don't have that holistically understood. I'm not saying cloud is good or bad or on-premise is good or bad, but I wouldn't say one or the other is good or bad. It's really how you spend on your operating dollars and the cost of the technology. But don't let anyone think that a product is easier to maintain because it's in a cloud. That's BS. Companies want you to get in their cloud because they make more money. And again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing because it alleviates a lot of problems for your organization. So please don't think I'm saying good or bad on cloud, but just realize that there's a conversation that should be had. Third then is creating these workflows. Let's define them up in the planning, build out the technology to do it, and then create the workflows. This is where the plan, do, check, act, and the next slide you're gonna see is the workflows is where the criticality is. That's our value add. That's our special sauce as a customer. When I did this for my healthcare organization, we rolled out 29 different workflows in a year. And every one of them had a value to business units or the company as a whole. And we got measured on that. And we said, what was the cost? What did we promise? What did we deliver? Guess what? It's not easy. You don't just say, well, the cost is $5, we'll deliver it in a week and we're going to make $10 or save $10. It's a plan, do, check, act again. And business and IT people have to remember that. Just because you throw the technology and the workflows in doesn't mean it's perfect. We'll always be adjusting this. And then we have to build out this ecosystem into a single workflow. It is so critical to understand the Salesforces of the world, the people that develop your mobile app, and the people like Mitel. You cannot have them be against each other. You have to bring them in. So when I was leading my organization, I brought these companies together and I said, you will work together on the betterment of my organization. You're not here to sell me a product. You're here to make me better. And that's the way you do it, is you all work together. And if you're not going to work together, or if you're a company that says, I'm going to do everything, because there is no one company. Everyone talks about the Amazon experience. When I went to my healthcare organization, I said, we talk about the Amazon experience. Do you think Amazon really has one product sitting in the back end that's doing this for them? If you do, I would love to invest in that company because they're going to be bigger than Amazon is, and everyone knows how big Amazon is right now. Amazon is who they are, and they are phenomenal at this because they have this ecosystem built. They have these workflows built. They know how to have these technologies work together. They didn't just buy a Mitel system and say, oh, Mitel is this. They didn't just buy a Salesforce product and say Salesforce is it. They have lost the egos. It's not about product anymore for them. It's about this ecosystem. That's when we get to good consumer engagement. Again, the phased approach. Phase one, install the advanced consumer interaction capabilities, the workforce optimization, the screen recordings. This is where Mitel sits. And that might be a phase one for you. You might already have pieces of this. You might add small pieces to this. A phase two could be, is your PDCA phase one. Always plan, do, check, act. You always go back and say, am I doing this as good as I could? I can tell you you're not. You have to constantly do this. Then install these omnichannels, begin the ecosystem, maybe start with screen pops, create AI workflows. And then you go to a phase three, which is always plan, do, check, act back to one, always do plan, do, check, act to two. So it becomes more intense. And then we create the advanced ecosystems with these workflows. Data-directed routing. I bet many of you either listening to this non-real time or the people on the seminar now don't even know what data-directed routing is. My organization uses that all the time. That's where the channels integrated to the back end would produce data that would now tell the channels where to send that interaction. It might be a voice call, so use a voice call. When people would call in healthcare, I'm sure everyone on the line understands, is pretty complex, and our billing gets pretty complex. Many times when patients would call in for a new service, they would have an outstanding bill or would need help on their bill. We would check our database and reroute that patient. And we would say, you know, we understand, we see that you're having questions on your bills. We're going to reroute you to the billing department first to support you in that, and then bring you over to the scheduling. That's data-directed routing. It's very doable in organizations of 10 people, 20 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people. And then the last piece is the plan, do, check, act. We really need to know, after we start something, we identify our problems in a plan, we actually put it into production, we study the results, and now we go back and do it again. If you're not familiar with this, this is a critical part of your success. I find way too often that organizations put a technology in, they have this big bang cutover, and they think, A, I was promised something that I didn't get, or B, this doesn't do what I wanted it to do. And again, not talking about Mitel or any other technology, I can tell you 99% of the problem is not with the technology. It's that the plan either A, wasn't identified up front, or when we did the study the results, we didn't act upon it and change it to do it all over again. We just said, well, we put it in once and we were done. So to summarize, we talked about consumer engagement strategy, why it's important to have that, why digital transformation is a subset of that and how we can bring that into that plan, why technically an omni-channel conversation is important not only for the technologist, but for the business. And then we talk about building out that ecosystem. And then we talked about why we need to do planning, why we need to do plan, do, check, act, that mentality behind going down this journey. I promise you, if you take these recommendations, they're very well proven through my consulting life and through what I've been doing at Mitel, as well as somebody on the business, I promise you results for your organization are going to be outstanding. So with that, I'll leave it open. If there's any questions out there or wrap ups, that would be awesome.
All right, great. Thanks, Lou. So we'll just give everybody a minute or two here, just in case there are some leftover questions in anybody's mind. Just to give you a little insight to, obviously, Camera Corner and ACP is a Gold Mitel partner, and so we do have strong resources at Mitel that we can engage and help out with any projects that you may have. And so we do utilize Lou and some of the other teammates as well. But this was super informative, Lou. I really appreciate your insights on, you know, changing that conversation from call center to customer engagement and what that looks like as an organization.
Awesome. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks, you as well.
Thanks, everyone.